In our time, which is marked by crises and upheavals, many people increasingly feel a deep inner restlessness or sadness that accompanies them, somehow always being latently present. And this doesn't always have to be justifiable. But it is true that the few moments when these states are not present really stand out. It used to be the other way around. You would notice when you weren't feeling well due to restlessness or sadness. Today, it always seems to be there somehow, and only when it's not there. Do we notice the difference? Maybe you feel the same way? Feel free to comment. The reason is that the external world is in an unstoppable, very massive transformation, and it is difficult for us to find the usual anchor in this changeability and especially in this craziness. This anchor gives us inner stability. But this is precisely an important part of our transformation phase, which pushes us into spiritual ascension processes and stimulates our consciousness next level, expanding and transforming our way of perceiving. That's what we want to talk about today. First of all, I warmly welcome you to this episode of your Live Happily podcast. My name is Linda Gysi, and I have been a spiritual mentor for over 20 years. I am the author of the book Consciousness Next Level, the publisher of the Being Potential Method, or the founder of the Being Potential Method. This is a method that reactivates your inner strengths. Those who have been buried by traumatic experiences, by upbringing, by all your experiences, often already in childhood. If you want to know how to reactivate your Being Potential Method and why it is so incredibly important, we won't cover that here today. Instead, I invite you to our next free live show. I recommend you sign up right away. You can find the link in the video description of the Live Happily podcast description. And when you come, bring your biggest problem with you. You might as well tuck it under your arm, because with a bit of luck, we can work on it together and uncover your being potentials through these topics. You will simply learn how to reactivate them for yourself for a truly fantastic life. Yes. So here we are, first looking at the illusion of the old world, the illusion of the old matrix, because our previous life patterns, as well as our self-images and worldviews, have woven themselves like a net around our collective consciousness. And this network, one that is the old matrix, consists of everything we believe. Our scientific explanatory models, all the rules, laws, beliefs, and much more. All of this keeps us trapped in an illusion that limits our perception and narrows our consciousness. This is so deeply rooted in us that we are conditioned to believe that reality is exactly as we see and perceive it, and that only what we perceive with our physical senses exists. Even though many of us already know that this is an illusion, our inner, let's call it our inner system, our inner automated system, is so conditioned to think, perceive, and judge in familiar patterns that it happens automatically, even if we don't always notice it. And now the following is happening. Our familiar, external world and its structures are gradually disappearing. And the trust in the previous systems has been profoundly shaken. People are now increasingly required to think independently and above all outside of the box, and to empower themselves. He is indeed challenged to break away from the mesmerizingly lulling comfort of the system and choose the uncomfortable descent into his own truth. From this decision, the next. Insights will emerge, further stimulating your awakening. But only those who are in harmony with their own inner truth and have the courage to stand up for themselves and commit to themselves can ignite the next level of awakening. This process of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and self-empowerment is indeed essential to experience your full potential. So why do we need crises as catalysts for liberation? Yes, our challenges, or as we like to call them, crises that we are currently experiencing, are not random events, because they serve us as accelerators, because they force us to recognize and let go of outdated structures and ways of thinking, and with that, they also bring us into contact with our deepest fears, primal wounds, and survival programs, even self-sabotage programs. This is actually quite logical. We realize how much our reaction patterns are shaped by fear and insecurity. And this realization often triggers deep despair within us, as we recognize that we have often built our lives on sand, on lies, on fear, on repression, and much more, and it is unsettling. Once we realize how much we have harmed ourselves and those we love, yes, we know that we didn't know any better, and yet realizing what that might have caused is often very, very, very shocking. And it's not just you, I feel the same way. Yes, these processes of realization are really something else. As we become more aware and start to bring this awareness into our patterns, we stop reacting to them automatically. And that is simply a very important point. This marks the beginning of a profound journey of healing, and the more authentic we become, the more energy is released. This energy was previously tied up in inner conflicts or limitations. Yes, and this released energy helps us to stand up and move to a higher level of consciousness. This marks the transition into a completely new era. And what's super exciting is that the year 2024, meaning this year, has heralded the beginning of a new cycle, clearly marking it as distinct from previous cycles. The structures of the previous matrix, which have long indeed given us a sense of security and stability, are now undoubtedly truly beginning to crumble. And those who put their energy and effort into trying to repair the crumbling structures or strive to maintain them will eventually internally burn out. Yes, this doesn't just affect the so-called average person, I believe that's the correct term, you know what I mean, but also the old rulers who still add a layer of madness to maintain the power structures of the old matrix. You can imagine it like this. They add madness, it's confusion, it's insecurity for us. This releases fears, and they believe they can control us with them. This has worked so far, but it will no longer work, especially for those who accept the challenge to think independently and empower themselves. And we can already recognize these beginnings, because not only is something old falling apart, but more and more new projects, peace efforts, inventions, standing up for the truth, and much more are paving the way. And we are gradually replacing the old matrix, and in the process the difference between light and shadow becomes increasingly clear, and some of us will recognize how much the shadow reveals itself in its ugliest grimace, and then to accept how much we have entered into a relationship of trust with the hideousness of this grimace in the past. And this can plunge many people into deep disgust or even into a state of shock. Yes, that's on the system level, where we realize, my goodness, what have we allowed to be done to us? But you know, what we are discussing here applies especially to your very personal level as well. And it may be that you will also have realizations that you have entered into a relationship of trust with people or structures that provide a sense of security, which, when you recognize how wrong it is and how much you have been deceived, can deeply shake you. Yes, make sure not to judge yourself too harshly, but embrace the process to clear things up within yourself. Because of this, it is possible that some of us may experience a growth crisis that forces us to stop and immediately find new ways. This also explains why so many people are suddenly making big changes out of nowhere, right now. Quit their job, even though they might not yet know what comes next. Free themselves from toxic relationships, or resolve family issues, or distance themselves from family matters, and denounce injustice. Yes, and really also take many risks to ensure, for example, justice or clarity, because we can no longer bear to engage in connections with deceit, falsehood, blackmail, and manipulation. This is becoming increasingly visible as the worlds separate. The low vibrating world and the high vibrating world are drifting apart in such a way that the more distance we get from the low vibrating, or those who also distance themselves from the low vibrating, suddenly recognize the true face, this can be a bitter realization. But these realizations can also make old patterns or traumatic experiences within ourselves visible. And then, on top of all the upheaval, comes the necessity of inner healing. Yes, because a lot is simply rising to the surface. Currently, I am talking to an incredible number of people who are seeking help because they are completely overwhelmed by the processes. Let's take a look into the future. Humanity is now at a very crucial turning point in its history. The transformation we've been talking about for so long is now truly beginning to take place. Yes, and even though many people consider themselves to be thinking or living differently, a trend of consciousness and upheaval is now becoming visible, which is ultimately truly and completely new. And that needs to be processed, integrated, understood, all sorts of things. And yes, surprisingly few people are able to endure true freedom and take responsibility for their free life, which also brings consequences. But I say very clearly, know that it is worth facing the fear. So don't remain stuck in it, because the old cycles of unfreedom are ending and new cycles of freedom are beginning. So when you are in the new cycle, when you are in your development, you can't just stop in between and say, I will stay here and camp and want to remain in my old fear. You are challenged to move forward, yes, into unfreedom, into the unfreedom, not just into the 2001 liberation of unfreedom and thus into freedom. Yes. Sudden and unpredictable events can certainly still do their work. Yes, we perceive them as crises, but they are inevitable because they truly help us to break the matrix of our old world and self-image, and to embrace or even surrender to our spiritual ascension. Why do I use the word to break through? Because I believe no matter where you stand, whenever you have to break through a limitation, it can be uncomfortable. There are very, very few who totally enjoy it, yes. Because a boundary also always conveys a sense of security at first. And when this boundary is dissolved or broken, or if you want to overcome it, however you choose to phrase it for yourself, you enter the unknown, and the feeling of security diminishes. And that can be uncomfortable. Yes, it's the same for me. Of course, I also know people who really enjoy overcoming it, and it happens even faster. That's already the case. You don't remain paralyzed in front of it as much, the more practiced you are. But it can be that one thinks this way at first. Challenging fear, the next few decades are crucial for us as humanity, because a quantum leap in human consciousness is planned. So it is intended, and it may be true that we cannot find the anchor in the external world right now. But we can certainly find the anchor within ourselves. And for that, we often first need to reconnect with our being potentials, meaning truly with our strengths, and reactivate them, muster the courage, and heal our primal wounds. And if you feel like you are currently in this process, then I warmly invite you once again to our live show USAND, where you will receive support for exactly this process. I am really, really looking forward to your comment. And if you like, feel free to follow me on Instagram. There you'll always find wonderful centered tips for your positive, self-empowering development. And yes, until next time, I say with love, the very, very best for you, your sister in spirit, your Linda.